At 10:50 a.m. local time, the calm surface of the Arabian Gulf broke with the low thumping of rotor blades. An Iranian Navy helicopter crept toward the USS Fitzgerald, a guided missile destroyer with more firepower than the entire Iranian fleet combined. The helicopter's mission was simple on paper but reckless in execution: force the American warship to change course, film the moment, and hand Tehran a propaganda win. What they didn't realize was that this mission would reveal far more about Iran's weakness than its strength. Inside the Fitzgerald's Combat Information Center, sailors leaned over their glowing radar screens. The ship's N/Spy 1D Aegis radar, a system built to track ballistic missiles in the upper atmosphere, had locked onto what looked like an airborne antique. To sailors used to seeing hypersonic missile drills, watching a helicopter from the Cold War era try to play Intimidator felt almost like comedy. The radar assigned it track 0341. In under 3 seconds, the ship's combat computer had already identified the aircraft type, cross-referenced it with threat libraries, and filed it under negligible. It even generated 47 separate firing solutions, from standard missiles to the CRAM point defense system. If this were wartime, the helicopter would have been reduced to falling debris before its crew finished adjusting their headsets. But this wasn't war, it was theater. The Iranian helicopter, an aging SH-3 Sea King variant purchased back when disco dominated American nightclubs, was flying straight into a modern naval fortress. Its Vietnam-era Doppler radar lit up the Gulf with signals so outdated that the Fitzgerald's electronic warfare suite, the N/SLQ-32, didn't just detect them, it cataloged them, fingerprinted them, and stored every pulse for future exploitation. Each radar ping was essentially the helicopter teaching the Americans how to beat it. And the Americans, grinning in the CIC, were all too happy to learn. Inside the helicopter, the Iranian crew fought not just the wind, but their own machine. The cyclic stick shuddered in the pilot's hands, vibrations rattling from rotor bearings that should have been retired when VHS tapes were still a thing. Warning lights flickered across the dashboard, most long since disconnected because replacement parts haven't existed since the Shah fled Tehran. The crew had 45 minutes of fuel at best, less if the aging T-58 engines coughed their last. On the Fitzgerald, sailors barely paid attention. The destroyer's 4 gas turbines pushed 100,000 horsepower through the sea, cruising at a casual 30 knots. The ship carried 90 vertical launch cells, each one capable of hurling an SM-2 missile at Mach 3.5. That meant in an actual fight, the helicopter would last maybe 30 seconds. For the Americans, this wasn't a contest. It was an amusement. The CIWS Phalanx, a 6-barreled 20mm Gatling gun designed to shred supersonic sea-skimming missiles, tracked the Iranian chopper automatically. The barrels didn't even elevate. Why waste the energy? It would be like bringing a sledgehammer to a mosquito. The operator used the chance as manual practice, lazily following the helicopter across the scope. At 500 feet and 110 knots, the firing solution was child's play. A 1-second burst, 94 tungsten rounds, target gone. But for Iran, this was serious. Orders from Tehran were clear: confront the American destroyer, film it, and prove the Gulf belonged to them. The helicopter dropped to 500 feet above the waves, angling in on what the pilot imagined was an attack profile. To the Iranians, it was bold and aggressive. To the Americans, it looked like a flying museum exhibit wheezing toward a modern fortress. Through the scratched plexiglass windscreen, the pilot spotted the Fitzgerald holding steady, not changing speed, not changing course. The ship's wake foamed across the sea behind it, indifferent, untouchable. Then came the transmission, crackling over unencrypted VHF. American warship, you are approaching Iranian waters. Change course immediately. The accented English broke through static. The Fitzgerald's comms team glanced at one another. They recorded every word, suppressing grins. Then, to twist the knife, they patched a female sailor onto the net to respond. The effect was instant. Iranian state media would rage for days, but inside the CIC, sailors were biting their lips to keep from laughing. While the Iranian pilot repeated his demand in broken English, the Fitzgerald's intelligence team was already busy strip mining every electronic emission. The SLQ-32 scanned across the spectrum, grabbing everything: radar pulses, radio chatter, navigation beacons. Each signal was broken down into frequency, pulse repetition, and signal strength, building a digital fingerprint for that exact helicopter. To the Iranians, their comms were business as usual. To the Americans, it was like Christmas morning. They were listening on unprotected civilian frequencies, 121.5 MHz emergency, 243 MHz military emergency, even VHF maritime channels. No encryption, no frequency hopping. Not even 1980s level security. It meant that in a future fight, US jammers would shut them down in seconds. The Fitzgerald's intelligence officer smirked. They're basically handing us the keys to their front door. And thanks to Link 16, the comedy didn't stay local. Every American ship and aircraft within 200 nautical miles saw the exact same picture in real time. Think of Link 16 as the military's encrypted WhatsApp, where each platform takes millisecond turns speaking, so no one ever overlaps. That meant the cruiser 50 miles away, the carrier 200 miles out, and every strike fighter overhead all had the same firing solution on that single Iranian track. If this were real combat, that helicopter would have been destroyed by half a dozen different systems before its pilot even keyed the mic again. Meanwhile, inside the SH-3, the stress was mounting. The fuel gauge dropped faster than expected, each attempt to match the destroyer's speed-draining reserves. The port engine oil pressure was sliding into the red. The crew chief tapped the pilot's shoulder, pointing at the gauges. They had minutes, maybe, before a catastrophic failure. Back aboard the Fitzgerald, the bridge team treated the harassment like background noise. One sailor on deck waved at the helicopter, the casual, one-handed wave you'd give to tourists on a ferry. The gesture infuriated the Iranian crew more than any weapon system could. It was a silent reminder, you're not a threat, you're entertainment. The destroyer's combat computer kept crunching. Engagement zones were crystal clear, SM-2 missiles at 90 miles for long range, ESSM at 27 miles for medium range, and the Phalanx CIWS for the last mile. The Iranian helicopter wasn't even inside the outer perimeter of that layered defense. It was like trying to storm a medieval castle while you're still stuck in the parking lot. The Iranian pilot tried one last act of bravado. Pushing the collective forward, he dove his SH-3 toward the destroyer's stern, the old airframe groaning under the strain. To him, it was an aggressive attack run. To the Americans, it looked like a tired workhorse limping into retirement. He keyed the mic again, voice cracking with desperation. "This is your final warning. Change course now." The demand carried all the authority of a toddler refusing bedtime. In the Fitzgerald CIC, the tactical action officer chuckled and ordered the comms team to keep recording. Every word was priceless material for the next intel briefing, and for propaganda in Tehran. Everyone knew exactly what was happening. The Iranians weren't really threatening the destroyer. They were recording sound bites, clips to air on state television with dramatic music. This wasn't warfare, it was content creation. On deck, sailors continued routine maintenance, barely glancing at the helicopter buzzing overhead. One crewman even mimed taking a photo, grinning up at the chopper. The Iranian pilot saw it and clenched his teeth. Every second the Americans refused to react was another blow to his pride. But the helicopter itself was the bigger enemy. The fuel gauge showed less than 800 pounds remaining, barely enough to limp back to base. The port engine's oil pressure had fallen deep into the red, and the temperature needle crept higher. The crew chief knew what that meant. Push any harder and they'd be ditching in the Gulf, begging for a rescue. Back in the CIC, the executive officer stepped into the room. "Are they really still on clear voice comms?" he asked. The intelligence officer grinned. "Sir, I can tell you what the pilot had for breakfast. He's been complaining about his wife's chicken curry on Channel 16. Laughter rippled through the sailors, but the data was serious gold. Every frequency, every emission, every detail was now permanently stored. The next time this helicopter, or any like it, tried to pull the same stunt, the Fitzgerald's jammers would shut them down before they could even lift off. The Iranian pilot banked hard for another pass, trying to make it look menacing. But to the sailors on deck, it looked more like a seagull circling a fishing trawler. By now, the SH-3 was flying on prayers and fumes. The gauges screamed warning after warning, the airframe rattled with every turn, and the smell of hot oil filled the cockpit. The crew chief leaned forward, tapping the pilot's helmet with urgency. It was time to go home before the old bird fell out of the sky. But the Iranians needed one last piece of evidence. As the Fitzgerald executed a routine navigation turn toward its next waypoint, the pilot seized the moment. Keying the mic, his voice came over the airwaves in triumph. "American warship is retreating. Islamic Republic has defended our waters." The claim was absurd. The destroyer was still in international waters, following a pre-planned course, but the Iranian crew had what they needed, a recording to spin into a victory. Inside the CIC, the intelligence team exchanged grins, making sure the whole exchange was logged. They knew exactly how this would play out. By evening, Iranian state television would cut together grainy helicopter footage with dramatic music, declaring that Tehran had forced a US destroyer to back down. In reality, the Americans had gained something far more valuable, a full electronic profile of Iran's antique naval aviation. On deck, sailors joked as the helicopter turned tail and limped back toward Iranian airspace, smoke trailing faintly from one engine. For the Fitzgerald, it had been a day of free intelligence gathering, a live demonstration of overwhelming superiority, and, for the younger sailors, a story they'd laugh about for years. The executive officer summed it up best, leaning over to the TO with a smirk. "Gentlemen, they just risked an irreplaceable aircraft to make us change course by 10 degrees. That's not a show of force, that's a comedy act." And so, while Tehran would broadcast its heroic defense, the truth was different. The world's most advanced destroyer had been confronted by a flying relic, and in the process, the Iranians had revealed more about their own vulnerabilities than their strength. The USS Fitzgerald sailed on, untouched, unbothered, and still master of the sea.